For over 100 years, the scientific community has had one absolute favorite punching bag. I mean, we're talking about a historical figure who faced an entire century of relentless scientific mockery. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into a story that honestly plays out like a mystery novel, but it's actually one of the most stunning paradigm shifts in modern science.
Yeah, science literally laughed at this guy for 100 years. This one man essentially became the poster child for pseudoscience. For decades, if you wanted to perfectly describe the exact kind of, wishful thinking that serious, rigorous researchers were supposed to avoid at all costs, you just used his name. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, the guy who gave us the unconscious, the ego, the id, dream interpretation, the whole shebang. Modern science spent the better part of a century trying to just bury him, basically deciding he was a guy who simply guessed wrong. And critics? Well, they absolutely did not hold back. They called his work unverifiable, unfalsifiable, basically mythology dressed up as medicine. That was the rock-solid consensus from 20th century critics. Neuroscientists and psychologists completely wrote off his ideas as just the random intuitions of a brilliant, sure, but ultimately unscientific mind. But then, an absolute bombshell dropped. On July 1, 2026, researchers at the University of Oslo published a paper in the neurocognitive journal Entropy, and it literally stopped the scientific world in its tracks. Because what they found, hiding inside the most advanced model of brain function ever developed, was Freud. He was there all along.
Part 1. The Secret Neurologist, a brain scientist ahead of his time.
So, here's a wild fact a lot of people don't actually know. Sigmund Freud started his career as a neurologist. Seriously, he was a brain scientist who spent years looking at the physical nervous system under microscopes. Back in 1895, he wrote this incredibly dense mathematical document called Project for a Scientific Psychology. He was literally trying to map out the human mind purely through physical neural mechanisms, like energy flowing through networks of neurons. But he never published it. He knew the brain imaging technology of 1895 it didn't exist to prove his ideas. So, forced to adapt, he invented the clinical metaphors of psychoanalysis in the early 1900s instead, just to describe those real neural processes. And it took until 2026 for the University of Oslo to prove he was actually describing physical biology the entire time.
Part 2. The Predictive Brain, how your mind actually works.
Okay, to really understand how Freud was vindicated here, we have to look at the dominant framework in cognitive neuroscience today. It's called predictive processing. See, for a long time, we kind of thought of the brain as this passive receiver, right? Just taking in information from the outside world. But this new model, which is championed by brilliant neuroscientists like Carl Friston at University College London, completely flips that idea on its head. It argues that the brain is actually an active prediction machine. It's constantly generating hypotheses about what's about to happen and then updating those predictions based on the incoming sensory data.
Here's how this cycle actually plays out. Step 1. Your brain generates a prediction. Step 2. The sensory data actually arrives. And Step 3. Your brain compares the two and updates its model. Think about it. When you walk into a familiar room, your brain has already predicted what that room looks like before your eyes even fully process the light. Or, when a friend starts a sentence, your brain has already started predicting the end of it way before they finish talking. The world you experience isn't just raw data coming at you. It's the world your brain predicts it will be, just slightly corrected by reality. It is this constant, endless cycle.
Which brings us to part 3. 4 stunning parallels. The same idea, a century apart. This is the big climax, right here. Because when researcher Erik Steeneke and his team at the University of Oslo laid Freud's classic theories right alongside modern predictive processing, they realized something absolutely incredible. They were describing the exact same phenomena, just speaking entirely different languages. Let's break down the first parallel. Take Freud's clinical concept of projection. Attributing your own feelings or intentions to other people. Well, in modern predictive processing, the brain does exactly this. It projects its prior expectations onto incoming sensory data. And when those expectations are strong enough, they actually override what is physically right in front of you. Mechanistically speaking, attributing your own feelings to someone else is identical to your brain's strong predictions overriding actual sensory input. It's the exact same thing. Next up, we have wish fulfillment. Freud famously argued that dreams represent the fulfillment of unconscious wishes. Well, think about modern predictive processing. What happens when you go to sleep? The sensory input from the outside world gets drastically reduced, but your brain, it doesn't just turn off. It keeps right on generating predictions. So, without reality's sensory data there to correct them, these internally generated predictions just run absolutely wild. They're shaped entirely by the brain's own expectations and desires. Dreams are quite literally just uncorrected predictions.
And that brings us to Freud's arguably most famous concept, repression, pushing painful thoughts completely out of conscious awareness. For decades, critics called this a total myth, but predictive processing reveals that the brain actively minimizes what we call prediction error. Basically, thoughts that threaten the brain's stable model of the world are automatically suppressed. It's not some conscious choice you're making, it's just the brain's automatic filtering system hard at work trying to maintain stability. Repression is, in fact, a verified, automatic neural filter.
Finally, let's look at transference. In psychoanalysis, this happens when patients unconsciously transfer feelings from their past relationships onto their therapist. And guess what? Predictive processing proves the brain does exactly this. It uses prior experience to build templates for current social situations. It is literally using old relationship data to navigate your present interactions. That old pattern becomes the exact blueprint for the new one, the exact same idea, proven a full century apart.
Part 4. Bridging the treatment gap, uniting two worlds of mental health. Now, let's talk about why this actually matters today. Because this convergence, it isn't just some neat academic plot twist. It's a real revolution for patient care.
See, for decades, the mental health field has suffered from this really damaging split. On one side, you had neuroscience, completely focused on brain chemistry, neural circuits, and medication. And on the other side, psychotherapy, focused on meaning, mental patterns, and personal stories. And these two worlds, they almost never spoke to each other. We were left with this huge gap, medication without meaning and talk therapy without a physical mechanism, two totally incomplete pictures of the exact same human mind.
But by bringing these two worlds together, the researchers in Oslo argue that having this unified language could lead to radically more effective treatments. We are talking about unified approaches for depression, anxiety, trauma, and personality disorders. These are incredibly complex conditions where brain chemistry and personal meaning-making are just deeply intertwined. By finally understanding that the physical mechanism and the psychological experience are essentially one and the same, practitioners can actually treat the whole patient. It's a real game-changer. Consider this incredible insight directly from Eric Stanek. When we attribute qualities, intentions, or feelings to other people, our brain shapes our experience of the world in line with established expectations. This is not a metaphor. This is neuroscience. This is also psychoanalysis. Just let that sink in. These two incredible fields of study were simply separated by a century of needless division, but they are observing the exact same fundamental truths about human nature.
So, let's summarize the brain's true, validated actions. The brain predicts, it projects, it represses, it dreams, it transfers the past onto the present. What was once considered nothing more than poetic metaphor or, unscientific guesswork is now proven neural mechanism. Freud didn't have the brain scanners, but his intuitions about the system's architecture were incredibly, stunningly accurate.
Which leaves us with one final thought to close out this explainer. If the man science mocked for an entire century was actually right all along, what else about your own mind is just waiting to be rediscovered? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.